Marcus Thorne had successfully closed a $12 billion pharmaceutical merger the month before, but as he stood in his corner office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, surrounded by gleaming trophies of corporate conquest, walls lined with framed Forbes covers, he realized he was being utterly defeated by 2 words on a death certificate he couldn't stop reading: Stillborn. Twins. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling chapter. For 6 months and 11 days, the gold-plated memorial plaque on Marcus's mahogany desk had read only, "Two souls. Gone too soon." It was the sole public acknowledgement of the tragedy that had hollowed out the 35-year-old billionaire's life, the stillbirth of his identical twin sons, Adam and Elias. Sons he'd never held. Sons he'd buried without ever seeing their faces. Marcus had tried everything a man with unlimited resources could attempt to fill the void. He'd thrown himself into quarterly projections until his CFO begged him to sleep. He'd donated millions to neonatal research funds with their names attached. He'd even hired 3 different grief counselors, offering obscene retainers. But they'd all eventually admitted they couldn't reach him through the fortress of control he'd rebuilt around himself. The board had stopped being subtle 2 weeks ago. His COO had suggested a temporary leave during the last executive meeting. A major shareholder had questioned his judgment on a conference call with barely concealed concern. Even his personal assistant had approached with that carefully diplomatic expression that meant "we're worried about you." Marcus's custom suits, Brioni, $7,000 each, hung looser on his frame than they had 6 months ago. His bloodshot eyes burned from sleepless nights reviewing the same medical reports, and the crushing realization that all his billions couldn't buy him answers to the questions that haunted him. Why had the cremation been so rushed? Why had Dr. Vance looked so terrified during that final meeting? Why did the neonatal wing's operating costs keep appearing in his company's quarterly reports? That's when she appeared. Dr. Eleanor Vance, his lead physician, the woman who delivered the devastating news, materialized in his office doorway after hours like she'd crossed an invisible threshold. She carried no briefcase, no tablet, no medical charts. Just a single photograph clutched against her chest. Her clothes were professional but rumpled, her eyes red-rimmed, and she moved with the kind of careful determination that doctors develop when they're about to destroy someone's world a second time. She stopped at the edge of Marcus's desk, her trembling hands gripping that photograph, taking in the scene. The memorial plaque, the untouched whiskey, the man who'd built an empire but couldn't escape his grief, the security monitors showing his guards stationed outside pretending not to worry about their boss. "Marcus," she said, her voice somehow cutting through the silence that had become his constant companion. "I need to show you something." Marcus looked up at her, too exhausted to question why his doctor was in his office at 11 p.m. offering cryptic statements. His head of security was already moving toward the intercom, ready to have her escorted out, but Marcus held up his hand. Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare hope, because hope was the cruelest currency a man like him could spend, and he'd already bankrupted himself 6 months ago when they'd placed that death certificate in his hands. Dr. Vance stepped fully into the office, and the door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made his pulse spike. She'd always been unshakable, the kind of physician who delivered bad news with clinical precision and moved on to save the next patient. But tonight, her hands trembled as she held that photograph like it contained something radioactive. "I need you to sit down," she said. "I'm fine standing." His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from months of holding everything in. The skyline behind him blazed with 1,000 points of light, each one representing someone going home to their family, to their children, to lives that hadn't shattered. "Marcus, please." There was something in her tone, not pity, not the careful professionalism he'd come to expect, but genuine fear. He'd seen that look once before, in the delivery room, when everything had gone silent and the nurses had stopped meeting his eyes. He sat. Dr. Vance moved to his desk, but didn't sit in the guest chair. Instead, she stood at the edge, placing the photograph face down on the mahogany surface between them. Her finger rested on its back, as if she was still deciding whether to go through with this. "6 months ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I told you your sons were stillborn. I signed the death certificates myself. I watched you sign the cremation authorization. I attended the private memorial service you held in the hospital chapel. Marcus's jaw tightened. I know what happened 6 months ago. I was there. No. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. You weren't. Not really. Because I lied to you, Marcus. We all did. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus heard them, processed them, but they didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. His mind, the same mind that had navigated hostile boardrooms and outmaneuvered Wall Street's sharpest predators, suddenly felt sluggish, drowning. What are you talking about? Dr. Vance's hand lifted from the photograph. She didn't flip it over. Not yet. The genetic screening we did at 28 weeks showed a severe mutation, X-linked ichthyosis with cardiac complications. I came to you with a treatment plan, an experimental gene therapy protocol. Cutting edge, controversial, untested on twins. You remember that conversation? He remembered. He'd vetoed it immediately. Too risky. Too experimental. Too many variables he couldn't control. He'd told her to focus on palliative care, to make them comfortable, to let nature take its course if the worst happened. You said no, Dr. Vance continued. You forbade me from pursuing it. And then, during delivery, everything went wrong exactly as we feared. They were dying, Marcus. Both of them. We had maybe minutes. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Get to the point. She flipped the photograph over. 2 infants. Tiny, fragile, their skin bearing the telltale scaling pattern of their condition. They lay in separate chambers of a specialized incubator, wrapped in monitoring wires, their small chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. The timestamp in the corner read 3 days ago. Marcus's vision tunneled. The room tilted. Their names are Adam and Elias, Dr. Vance said, her voice breaking. And they're alive. The photograph slipped from Marcus's fingers and fluttered to the desk. He couldn't look away from it. Couldn't process what his eyes were showing him versus what his mind had accepted as immutable truth for 183 days. That's not possible. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like he was speaking someone else's lines in a play he hadn't auditioned for. I know. Dr. Vance's composure was fracturing. A tear tracked down her cheek, and she didn't bother wiping it away. I know how this sounds. I know what I'm asking you to believe. Marcus's hand shot out and snatched the photograph back, bringing it close to his face. He studied every pixel, every shadow, searching for evidence of manipulation. The babies were real. The medical equipment was real. The timestamp was 3 days ago, December 12, 2025. While he'd been reviewing acquisition targets and attending charity galas and pretending to be whole, his sons had been breathing. Where are they? His voice dropped to something dangerous, something that had made competitors fold and adversaries retreat. Where the hell are they right now? St. Catherine's Medical Center. Sub-Basement 3. A private neonatal wing that doesn't appear on any public floor plans. How long have you been lying to me? Since the moment they were born. The admission hung between them like a confession at an execution. Marcus stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with the kind of controlled rage that preceded violence or breakdown. He couldn't decide which was coming. You let me bury empty caskets. His voice was barely above a whisper now, which somehow made it worse. You let me stand in that chapel and eulogize children who were alive. You watched me destroy myself for 6 months while my sons were in a basement. We were saving them. Dr. Vance's composure shattered completely. Do you understand that? Every single day for the past 6 months, we've been fighting to keep them alive. The gene therapy you vetoed? We did it anyway. We had to. Because in that delivery room, you weren't there to say yes or no. You were in the waiting area signing forms, and they were coding on the table. Marcus's fist slammed into the desk, so hard his computer monitor jumped. You had no right. I had every right. I'm a doctor. I took an oath. And those boys deserved a chance even if their father was too afraid to give it to them. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus staggered back a step, his breathing ragged. Too afraid. She'd called him afraid. Not cautious. Not prudent. Afraid. The therapy was untested, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. The risks were worth taking. And it worked, Marcus. Against every odd, every statistic, every prediction, it worked. Your sons are alive. They're not healthy yet. They may never be completely healthy, but they are fighting and breathing and growing stronger every day. Marcus looked down at the photograph again. 2 tiny faces, eyes closed, completely unaware that their existence had just detonated their father's entire reality. Take me to them, he said. Now. Right now. The drive to St. Catharines took 22 minutes through midnight Manhattan traffic, but it felt like hours. Marcus sat in the back of his town car, while Dr. Vance rode beside him in silence, both of them trapped in their own versions of the same nightmare. His driver, Thomas, had asked no questions when they'd rushed from the building, just opened the door and drove. Marcus couldn't stop looking at the photograph. He'd pulled it from his pocket 6 times already, studying the curves of their faces, the tiny fingers curled against their chests, searching for traces of himself in their features. Did they have his nose? His mother's eyes? He didn't know. Couldn't tell from the image. 6 months ago, he'd been preparing to learn these details in the worst possible way, through photographs of stillborn infants he'd been too afraid to hold. Now he was racing to meet sons who'd been alive this entire time. The facility, Dr. Vance said, breaking the silence as they pulled into the hospital's underground entrance. It's restricted access. No visitors. No exceptions. The treatment protocol requires absolute sterile conditions. I'm not a visitor. I'm their father. Legally, you're the father of 2 deceased infants. That's what every document says. That's what the state records show. Marcus turned to her, his expression hard. Then we have a problem. They parked in a section of the garage Marcus had never seen before, marked only with a yellow D3 painted on the concrete. Dr. Vance led him to a service elevator that required both a keycard and a retinal scan. The descent was smooth and silent, and when the doors opened, they faced a corridor that looked nothing like the public hospital floors above. This was different. Clinical. Secret. The walls were unmarked white, the lighting sterile and harsh, and every door they passed had biometric locks. No names. No room numbers. Just colored lights. Green, yellow, red, indicating God knew what. How many people know about this? Marcus asked. 8. The surgical team, 2 neonatal specialists, and me. And how many know they're mine? Dr. Vance hesitated. Everyone. They stopped at a door marked only with 2 green lights. Through a small observation window, Marcus could see the edge of medical equipment, the glow of monitors. His heart was hammering now, his hands clammy. He'd faced down boardrooms full of sharks, negotiated deals worth billions, stared down hostile takeover attempts without flinching. But this threshold terrified him. Before we go in, Dr. Vance said, her hand on his arm, you need to understand what you're going to see. They're stable now, but they're fragile. The scaling from the ichthyosis has improved dramatically, but it's still visible. They're smaller than normal 6-month-olds. They're connected to monitors constantly, and they can't leave this environment. Not yet. Maybe not for months. I don't care what they look like. I know you don't. But I need you to be prepared. Because the moment you walk through that door, you become complicit in everything we've done. The fraud. The falsified records. The experimental treatment. All of it. There's no going back from this, Marcus. He met her eyes. I stopped being able to go back the moment you showed me that photograph. Dr. Vance nodded, then pressed her palm to the biometric scanner. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and she pushed the door open. The room beyond was larger than Marcus expected, bathed in soft blue light from the monitoring equipment. And there, in the center, surrounded by a fortress of medical technology, was the specialized incubator from the photograph. Inside it, sleeping peacefully, were his sons. Marcus couldn't move. His legs had locked at the threshold, his entire body frozen in something between terror and awe. The photograph hadn't prepared him for this, for the reality of their tiny chests rising and falling, for the almost imperceptible movements of their fingers, for the undeniable proof that they were real and alive in his. Dr. Vance stood behind him, giving him space, but he could feel her watching him, waiting to see how he'd react. Waiting to see if the billionaire who'd spent 6 months building walls around his grief would shatter or hold. He took a step forward, then another. His dress shoes made no sound on the sanitized floor as he approached the incubator, each step feeling like walking through water. They were so small, impossibly small. The photograph had shown him their faces, but it hadn't conveyed the sheer fragility of them. Adam, he could see the name on a small digital label above the left chamber, had a shock of dark hair, just like Marcus's baby photos. Elias was nearly identical, but slightly smaller, his skin bearing more visible traces of the scaling condition Dr. Vance had described. Marcus's hand reached out instinctively, then stopped an inch from the glass. He was afraid to touch it, afraid that contact might somehow break the spell, might reveal this as another cruel dream he'd wake from in his empty penthouse. "You can touch the incubator," Dr. Vance said softly from behind him. "They can't hear you through the glass, but some parents find it helps." "How long have they been stable?" 3 weeks at this level. Before that, it was touch and go. We nearly lost Elias twice in the first month. Adam coded once at 8 weeks. Every day was a battle. Marcus pressed his palm flat against the warm glass, his eyes locked on the rise and fall of their tiny bodies. "And you did all of this without telling me." "I did all of this to save them. I know you can't see the difference right now, but there is one." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that made her take a step back. Not rage. Not the fury she'd braced for. Something worse. Something broken and grateful and poisonous all at once. "What you did," Marcus said slowly, his voice rough, "was unforgivable. You stole 6 months from me. 6 months I should have been here, watching them fight, helping them survive. You let me think I was childless. You let me bury my hope. I know. But what I did," his voice cracked. "What I did was worse. I was so terrified of losing control, so obsessed with managing risk, that I signed their death warrant before they were even born. You saved them in spite of me. Not because of me." The admission hung in the air between them. Dr. Vance's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "So now what?" she asked. Marcus turned back to the incubator, to his sons, to the 2 miracles that existed because someone had been brave enough to disobey him. "Now I make sure they survive. Whatever it costs. Whatever it takes. And we figure out how to make this legal before someone discovers what we've done." "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Vance said, her voice tight. "We're not the only ones who know about them anymore." The words hit Marcus like ice water. He spun from the incubator, his businessman's instincts firing back to life. "What do you mean, not the only ones? You said 8 people knew. You said this was contained." "It was. Until 3 days ago." Dr. Vance moved to a monitor station and pulled up what looked like security footage. Dr. David Wells from the Ethics Oversight Committee was doing a routine audit of experimental treatment protocols. He's meticulous, obsessively so. He found irregularities in our pharmaceutical requisitions, compounds that don't match any approved patient files. Marcus watched the grainy footage of a man in a white coat examining paperwork, his expression growing darker with each page. Does he know they're mine? Not yet. But he knows we're running an unauthorized gene therapy trial on infant twins. He knows we falsified death certificates. And he's filed a formal inquiry with the hospital board. She paused, her jaw tight. "The hearing is in 48 hours. 48 hours. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him again, the brief moment of connection with his sons already threatened by the machinery of bureaucracy and law. What happens at this hearing? If Wells proves we violated protocols, which he can, the twins become wards of the state pending investigation. They'll be transferred to a standard NICU facility, which means they lose access to the specialized equipment keeping them stable. The gene therapy requires consistent monitoring and adjustment. Moving them now could kill them." Dr. Vance nodded, her expression grim. "Wells isn't trying to hurt them. He's a good doctor. But he's also a fundamentalist when it comes to medical ethics. To him, we're criminals who kidnapped your children and experimented on them without consent." Technically accurate. Marcus began pacing, his mind already working through scenarios, legal strategies, angles of attack. This was familiar territory, a crisis that required resources and leverage. "Who's on the hospital board?" "Marcus, you can't just buy your way out of this. Watch me." He pulled out his phone, his thumb already scrolling through contacts. "I've donated $17 million to this hospital over the past 3 years. I personally funded their new cardiac wing. Someone on that board owes me a favor. It won't work. Wells has already documented everything. He has photos, lab reports, requisition records. Even if you delay the hearing, he'll go public. And when the media finds out that Marcus Thorne's supposedly dead twins have been alive in a secret facility for 6 months?" She shook her head. "The scandal alone will force action." Marcus stopped pacing. She was right. This wasn't a corporate negotiation where the party with the most money won. This was about law and ethics and the undeniable fact that they'd committed fraud. Multiple felonies, actually. And his wealth, his primary weapon against any threat, was useless here. He looked back at the incubator, at Adam and Elias sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that their existence was about to become a legal battlefield. "Then I'll talk to Wells myself," Marcus said. "Tonight." He won't meet with you. I already tried. He will if I make it worth his while. Marcus, I'm not bribing him. Though the thought had crossed his mind. I'm going to tell him the truth. About the gene therapy. About why you made the choice you did. About what moving them now would mean. Dr. Vance studied him for a long moment. You think he'll listen? I think he's a doctor who took the same oath you did. And if he's half as good as you say he is, he'll understand that sometimes saving lives means breaking rules. And if he doesn't? Marcus's jaw tightened as he looked at his sons one more time. Then I'll find another way. Dr. David Wells lived in a modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a detail that surprised Marcus given the man's position at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hospitals. The neighborhood was quiet at 1 in the morning, tree-lined streets empty except for the occasional dog walker. Marcus's town car looked obscenely out of place parked on the residential street. This is insane, Dr. Vance said from the passenger seat. She'd insisted on coming, though Marcus suspected it was less about supporting him and more about damage control. You can't just show up at his house in the middle of the night. Watch me. Marcus was already opening the door. He could call the police. He could have you arrested for harassment. Then let him. Marcus straightened his jacket, the same Tom Ford suit he'd been wearing for 18 hours now, rumpled and coffee-stained. He looked like hell and didn't care. Those boys in that incubator are my sons. I'll do whatever it takes. The brownstone's lights were off except for a dim glow from a second-floor window. Marcus climbed the steps and pressed the doorbell, then knocked when nothing happened. He waited 10 seconds and knocked again, harder this time. A light flicked on in the hallway. Footsteps. The sound of a deadbolt sliding back. Dr. David Wells opened the door wearing flannel pajama pants and a Cornell Medical School t-shirt, his graying hair disheveled. He was younger than Marcus expected, mid-40s, fit, with sharp eyes that went from confused to cold the moment he recognized his visitor. Mr. Thorne. Not a question. An accusation. Dr. Wells. I need 10 minutes of your time. It's 1 a.m. I know what time it is. I also know you filed a formal inquiry that could kill my sons in 48 hours. So I'm asking, as their father, for 10 minutes. Wells's expression didn't soften, but something flickered behind his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or professional interest. Dr. Vance told you. She did. And you came here to what? Threaten me? Bribe me? Wells crossed his arms. I've done my research on you, Mr. Thorne. I know how men like you operate. Everything has a price. Everyone can be bought. You're right. Marcus met his gaze steadily. That's exactly how I've operated for 15 years. It's how I built my company. It's probably how I destroyed my marriage. And it's definitely how I killed my sons. Wells blinked, thrown by the admission. Except they're not dead, Marcus continued. They're alive because Dr. Vance was willing to commit fraud to save them when I was too much of a coward to approve the treatment that could have saved them legally. So no, I'm not here to threaten you or bribe you. I'm here to tell you the truth and hope to God you're the kind of doctor who cares more about saving lives than following rules. For a long moment, Wells said nothing. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. 10 minutes, he said. But I'm not promising anything. Marcus followed him inside. Dr. Vance remained in the car, her face pale in the streetlight. The brownstone's interior was exactly what Marcus expected from an ethics committee chairman. Tasteful, modest, walls lined with medical texts and family photos. Wells led him to a small study and gestured to a chair, but remained standing himself. Talk, Wells said. So Marcus did. He told him everything. Marcus spoke for 40 minutes, not 10. Wells never interrupted, never checked his watch, just listened with the focused intensity of a man trained to hear what people weren't saying as much as what they were. He told Wells about the fertility arrangement that had made him a single father, about his wife Sarah's death from complications during her own pregnancy years before, about his pathological need to control every outcome, because control was the only thing that had ever kept him safe. He told him about the genetic screening at 28 weeks, about Dr. Vance's recommendation for the experimental gene therapy, about his immediate refusal. I didn't even consider it, Marcus admitted, his voice raw. I saw experimental and untested on twins, and I shut it down. Told her to focus on palliative care. Make them comfortable. I thought I was being responsible. Realistic. But I was just being afraid. Wells shifted in his chair, but still said nothing. When Dr. Vance told me they were stillborn, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd been my physician for 3 years. I trusted her completely. I signed the cremation forms. I held a memorial service. I spent 6 months convinced I'd lost them because I couldn't save them. Marcus's hands clenched. But the truth is worse. I lost them because I wouldn't even try. And now you want me to ignore everything Dr. Vance did? Wells asked quietly. The fraud, the falsified death certificates, the unauthorized treatment protocol. No, I want you to understand why she did it. She saved them, Dr. Wells. Against every protocol, every regulation, every rule you're trained to enforce. She saved 2 lives that would have been lost if she'd followed my orders. She also violated their autonomy. Yours, specifically. Wells leaned forward. You're their legal guardian. You have the right to refuse treatment on their behalf, even if that refusal results in death. That's medical ethics 101. And if I'd been in that delivery room when they were coding, if I'd seen them dying right in front of me instead of sitting in a waiting room signing paperwork. Marcus met his eyes. I would have said yes. I know that now. But Dr. Vance couldn't wait for me to figure it out. She had minutes, not hours. Wells was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and moved to his bookshelf, pulling down a worn leather journal. He flipped through pages filled with handwritten notes. 23 years ago, Wells said, I was a resident in Boston. We had a patient, a 15-year-old girl with acute liver failure. Her parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. They refused the blood transfusion that would have saved her life. He looked up. She died while we stood there with bags of O-negative blood that could have kept her alive. Marcus watched him carefully, sensing the shift. I've thought about that girl every day since, Wells continued. About whether her parents' right to refuse treatment outweighed her right to live. About whether I should have fought harder, broken protocol, done the transfusion anyway. He closed the journal. I never got the chance to save her. Dr. Vance got the chance to save your sons. And she took it. So you'll withdraw the inquiry? No. Wells set the journal down. But I'll delay the hearing. 2 weeks. That gives you time to legitimize this situation. Get proper legal guardianship documented. Bring in independent medical oversight. Create a paper trail that doesn't make Dr. Vance look like a kidnapper. It wasn't everything Marcus wanted. But it was enough. Thank you, Marcus said. Wells nodded. Don't make me regret this. Marcus didn't sleep. He went straight from Wells's brownstone back to St. Catherine's, back to the secret sub-basement wing, back to the room where his sons breathed and fought and existed in their sterile bubble. Dr. Vance was waiting for him, still in the same clothes from hours before. She looked as exhausted as he felt. Well, she asked. 2 weeks. He's delaying the hearing for 2 weeks while we legitimize everything. Marcus moved to the incubator, pressing his palm against the glass like he'd done before. The gesture was already becoming familiar. Necessary. But he wants independent medical oversight, proper documentation, legal guardianship papers that don't reference death certificates. That's better than I expected. He told me about a patient he lost. A girl who died because her parents refused treatment. Marcus's voice was quiet. I think he saw something of himself in you. The doctor who wanted to save someone but couldn't. Dr. Vance moved to stand beside him, both of them watching the twins sleep. So what's our next move? We need lawyers. Good ones. The kind who specialize in medical ethics and family law. And we need them yesterday. Marcus pulled out his phone, already composing emails in his head. We also need to bring in the independent oversight Wells wants. Someone whose credentials are beyond reproach. I know someone, Dr. Vance said. Dr. Sarah Chun at Johns Hopkins. She's one of the leading experts in pediatric gene therapy. If she signs off on the treatment protocol, Wells will have to listen. Can she be here by tomorrow? I can ask. Marcus nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the dozen other things that needed to happen. Legal paperwork, medical reviews, building a defensible narrative that explained the past 6 months without destroying Dr. Vance's career or jeopardizing the twins' custody. But as he stood there watching Adam and Elias, he realized something had shifted inside him. For 6 months, he'd operated in a fog of grief, going through the motions of his life while feeling nothing. Now, standing in this sterile room with his living, breathing sons inches away, he felt everything. Terror and hope and guilt and determination all tangled together into something that felt almost like purpose. I want to hold them, he said suddenly. Dr. Vance turned to him, surprised. Marcus, the isolation protocols. I know. I'm not asking to compromise their treatment. I'm asking when. When will they be strong enough that I can hold my sons? She studied the monitors, her medical mind calculating variables he couldn't begin to understand. If the gene therapy continues stabilizing at the current rate, maybe 4 weeks. 6 to be safe. 6 weeks. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. He'd already lost 6 months. What was another month and a half? I'll be here every day, Marcus said. Every single day until I can hold them. And then every day after that. The hearing is in 2 weeks. If things go badly, they won't. Marcus's voice carried the same certainty he used in boardrooms, the same unshakable confidence that had built his empire. But this time it wasn't arrogance. It was will. Pure, desperate will. I didn't find out my sons are alive just to lose them to bureaucracy. Dr. Vance smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since this nightmare began. For what it's worth, I'm glad you know. I'm glad you're here. I should have been here 6 months ago. Maybe. But you're here now. That's what matters. Marcus looked at his sons, at their tiny, perfect faces, and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever he had to sacrifice, they would survive this. They had to. The hearing took place exactly 14 days later in a windowless conference room on St. Catherine's administrative floor. Marcus sat at a polished table across from Dr. Wells and 3 other members of the ethics committee, flanked by 2 lawyers who'd cost him more per hour than most people made in a month. Dr. Sarah Chun from Johns Hopkins sat beside Dr. Vance, her credentials laid out in a 40-page report that Marcus had memorized. She'd spent 3 days reviewing the twins' treatment protocol, and her conclusion was unequivocal. The gene therapy had saved their lives, and moving them now would be medically catastrophic. Marcus had prepared a statement, rehearsed it, but when the committee chair asked him to speak, all his practiced words evaporated. My sons are alive because Dr. Vance was willing to risk everything to save them, he said simply. I was their father, and I failed them. She was their doctor, and she didn't. If following proper protocol means children die when they could have lived, then the protocol is wrong. The committee deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, Dr. Wells spoke. The ethics committee finds that Dr. Vance violated multiple protocols in her treatment of the Thorne twins. However, given the extraordinary circumstances, the success of the treatment, and Mr. Thorne's post facto consent, we are recommending formal censure rather than termination. The twins will remain in their current facility under independent oversight until medically cleared for transfer to standard care. It wasn't perfect. Dr. Vance's record would carry a permanent mark, but the twins were safe. That was all that mattered. 6 weeks later, Marcus sat in the same blue-lit room, but this time Dr. Vance was helping him into a sterile gown and gloves. The twins were 3 days past their 7-month mark, and their latest tests had finally cleared them for limited physical contact. Remember, Dr. Vance said, support their heads. They're stronger than they were, but they're still fragile. Marcus's hands were shaking as he approached the incubator. Adam was awake, his dark eyes tracking movement. Elias slept peacefully beside him. Dr. Vance carefully lifted Adam from his chamber, monitoring the various leads and tubes, then placed him in Marcus's arms. The weight of his son, barely 10 pounds, felt like everything. Marcus looked down at Adam's face, at eyes that were definitely his mother's, at tiny fingers that wrapped instinctively around his thumb. Hey, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. Hey, buddy, I'm your dad. Adam made a small sound, something between a coo and a sigh, and Marcus felt something inside him that had been frozen for 6 months finally thaw. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, accumulating wealth, controlling outcomes. But nothing, no deal, no acquisition, no victory, had ever felt as important as this moment. His son, alive and warm in his arms. His other son, sleeping peacefully nearby. Both of them breathing, fighting, surviving. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner, Marcus said softly. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Dr. Vance stood beside him, her eyes wet. You're doing great. Marcus smiled, unable to look away from Adam's face. We all are. 3 months later, Marcus Thorne held a press conference announcing the formation of the Thorne Foundation for Pediatric Gene Therapy Research. The foundation would fund experimental treatments for children with rare genetic conditions, with one non-negotiable requirement. No child would be denied treatment due to parental hesitation or regulatory caution. Standing beside him at the podium were Dr. Eleanor Vance and Dr. David Wells, unlikely partners in a mission that had started with fraud and ended with hope. And in the front row, carried by their full-time nurses, were Adam and Elias Thorne, 10 months old, thriving, and finally home. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next emotional journey. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Let us know in the comments below.